Don't move.
Don't move, Carlton.
Good morning, everyone. We welcome you both to the first day of spring and the weekly meeting of the Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority. Let's start with, if you'll stand and join me in repeating the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll have our Safety First minute presentation by Lamont Worthy. Now, this isn't going to be my video from last week, is it?
No,
okay.
I would like to thank the board for taking a moment to recognize safety. UTA as a developing culture of safety, and as such, this is why we do this safety minute. Was a nice segue off of Chairman Carlton's comment about the first day of spring. So I would like to talk about the first day of spring and what that brings. So we're going to see people getting out in their yards, starting their yard work and getting all the flowers spruced up. And with that, you want to be reminded to watch for your health, you know, lifting things. Make sure you're lifting with your legs, not putting strain on your back. Using knee pads when you're down there pruning those bushes and flowers. Another thing is to stay hydrated. And another thing we want to think of, because safety does extend outside of the UTA home, it extends to each and every one of our personal homes. And we want you to go, but we also want you to come back to work safe. So at home, remember, when you go out and you're starting to get outdoors, if you're near rivers, streams, watch for flooding, watch for fast-flowing water. We're going to have runoff starting because our temperatures are warming up. And this is where our beautiful waterways can be quite dangerous. It takes just 6 inches of water to knock a person, a full-grown man, over, and then we have a possible drowning that we would have to deal with. So be careful when we're out there enjoying Utah's beautiful environment, but also remembering that we want to be safe while we do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Lamont. That's a great message. Today we have a substitute for Bob Biles and Matt Sybil, and Matt, we're glad to have you here. Are there any public comments?
Mr. Chair, we didn't have any public comments for the meeting, but we do have one written public comment.
Okay.
That I'll read to you.
Thank you.
If I had to time myself, it might take me more than 2 minutes. It's a very extensive comment, but
That's
let me just read it here.
Please.
This is from Stacia Chavez, and she wrote on Tuesday, March 19th, so yesterday. To whom it may concern, I'm a parent of 3 Sundance ski team members and used the UTA bus system to get my children to and from Sundance during the 2017-2018 ski season. I found the bus route 880 to be extremely beneficial to not only me, but also to many other parents of ski team athletes because it saved the gas, worry, and time that comes with driving up the canyon. This year, we were disappointed to learn that the route was not offered at the same times that had previously allowed our children to get to ski practice via UTA bus lines. Our team in Sundance Resort have supported and hosted Protect Our Winters Day, POW Day, a campaign to take better care of the environment. For at least the past 2 seasons, we've been a part of the Sundance ski scene. This campaign has promoted riding the local UTA bus line up the canyon to reduce fuel emissions. The City of Orem and UTA also showcased its new energy-efficient bus this past summer during a mountain bike course demo, again at Provo Canyon. We were, by the way, I think that might have been the same bus that's out front, the Proterra bus. We were able to tour the bus there that day, and the overall message sent to all attendees was that UTA is working to make the bus system accessible to the canyon and eco-friendly. I do not feel this is the case with regards to the changes in Route 880. When I first noticed the change in times of the route, I contacted UTA and spoke to a representative about my concerns on how ski team members numbering over 250 will no longer be able to use the bus service because practice start after local schools dismiss for the day, and the last bus from Orem leaves before then. Nothing was changed, and no one from our group was able to use the bus to get to practice. Now I see that though Sundance is still open for the ski season, the route has been discontinued, or at least that's what it shows online. It makes sense to have a bus up the canyon and one that coincides with the timetables of regular users. Why not have a departure time at 3:45 or 4 p.m. on weekdays for Route 880 so that many members of the Sundance ski team can use the bus to get to practice? Without that option, we've had over 40 parents driving up the canyon twice per ski practice day, which makes that at least 80 trips up and down Provo Canyon per day, usually twice a week. This traffic is just from our subgroup from the ski team, not to mention all the other after-school canyon goers that could benefit from this too. And with the night skiing that Sundance offers Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, the bus could be useful for many people at that later time. This is something that I ask UTA to consider in relationship to its environmental and public service goals. Please keep Route 880 and consider adding a departure time between 3:45 to 4 p.m. during the entire ski season. Thank you, Stacia Chavez. Mr. Chair, if it's okay, I did follow up with one of our service planners in Mount Timpanogos. So I talked to Ken Anson this morning, and just a little background to give some context, which might help. Ken reminds me that we as an agency meet with the ski areas months in advance of opening ski bus service. So we worked that schedule with Sundance probably 3 months before the season began. With that partnership, the focus has been on workers and then weekends skiers. We originally got this request from Ms. Chavez middle of December, which was right at change day. And so we weren't really able to modify or contemplate modifying this year's ski service. But Ken tells me that we'll follow up with her, and then these are resources permitting, of course, but try and work this issue into the schedule for next year's ski bus service.
Well, that would be great. And, you know, we know that canyon transportation is just a growing issue along the Wasatch Front and what role that plays. And so maybe they could report back if there's any resolution that seems to work both fiscally and as well as for the community. So that'd be great. Thanks for that.
Yes, they will get in touch with Ms. Chavez today.
Any others, Matt, or is that it?
No, that was it, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll next entertain a motion for approval of our minutes of March 13th.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes from our March 13th, 2019 board meeting as written.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. We'll next go to our agency report from Steve Meyer. Steve, welcome and good morning.
Good morning, Chair. 2 items for you this morning. First, last week we received notification from the Federal Transit Administration that we've been listed in the Capital Investment Grant Report, and that's a key step in the advancement of the Ogden BRT project. And that allows us to, we are reviewed and deemed adequate to move forward with the process to try to obtain funding in the grant for that. We anticipate a small start grant, and we're going to push forward and try to see if we can get that this year. So I think you've had some discussions in DC with some folks, and this is a big step for UTA. Also, we did get a summary report complete for the Free Fair Days, and very successful Free Fair Day activities on February 28th and March 1st of this year. Total ridership increased by 20,000 on the February 28th and about 29,000 on Saturday, March 1st. That's about a 16% total overall ridership increase. Bus saw about a 10% increase, light rail 14%, front runner 46%. So it was good participation from the public. I was riding the 455 in yesterday and happened to hear a conversation across the aisle with a couple of riders, and one rider had taken it for Free Fare Day and decided to again ride, has been riding since then. So he's, we got one. We got a rider. And so I hope he's one of many, and because that is what we try to accomplish, right? Give people that experience and that exposure, give them a reason with the air quality concern to get out and try our system, and then hopefully they'll find it convenient and learn how to use it and become a regular rider. So we estimate using air quality standard criteria and some information from DEQ, about 96,000 pounds of net emissions reduced over those 2 days. So I think it was very successful, and appreciate what the legislature has done to help fund that in the future, and we look forward to future success. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that report. We did have a brief but good visit with Acting Administrator Jane Williams, and conveyed our excitement. And as we met with congressional delegation on the House side yesterday, also, shared that good news with them, and they were excited to hear the listing of the BRT project. So thank you. Thanks to your staff for. I realize a lot of work went to get it to that point, and still a lot of work to take it from that point. And we appreciate all their hard work as well.
Thank you.
Let's see. Looks like in place of Bob, we have Brad Armstrong, who's going to give us a financial report from February of 2019. Welcome, Brad.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I find it interesting that Bob Biles needs multiple people to sub for him when he's unable to be here.
It's reminding me what value we get in having Bob.
And especially since it's two unusually tall people who have to replace Bob as well. I wanted to first go over the UTA Board dashboard to cover the financial information, and I'll primarily address my comments to this and then take any questions that you may have. For the month of February, we saw sales tax revenue be the same as what was reported last week when we discussed the January financial statements, and those numbers are for the year-end 2018 because of the lag we have in terms of receiving sales tax revenue from the state. And we'll be updating that with, we'll have the January numbers in the March report, most likely. So for the year for 2018, just to recap what we discussed last week, we did come in above budget by about $4 million for the year, which is great. Farebox revenue for the month of February, if you note, is well below, it's about $1.2 million below budget. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have some accelerated close times for our financial statements that we didn't book all of our farebox revenue for the month of February quite yet. We expect to actually catch up a lot of that revenue in the March and April time periods, per my discussions with our controllership.
On that question, Brad, do we have a sense from those that do the rider numbers, like, do they feel like those numbers, when those are finally recorded, should be close to budget, or was there something like they just didn't have ridership on the system during the month of February?
With regard to farebox revenue, I think a lot of it had to do is we have some large educational customers who we have been waiting for enrollment numbers, and that's impacted that number. If we look down at ridership, sort of skipping ahead, we actually had ridership year-over-year increase of about 2% for the month, largely driven by the success of UVX and by front-runner ridership. Other areas have dropped year-over-year, however.
Yeah. Okay.
Going on, with regard to operating expenses, we came in about $1.9 million below budget, which is great. The two major factors that impacted that were service revenue, service expenses, contract services, and we did discuss that before. Most of that has to do with a timing issue, where people budget. Maybe they budgeted expense for the year and divided it by 12, and so it's evenly applied. But sometimes services and how we use them come in sort of lumpy. We may incur the costs mostly in March or something of that sort, and so we expect things to even out with regard to service expenses, operating contract services. Another piece was fuel expenses. Fuel expenses were about $700,000 below budget for the month, and our average expense for diesel fuel, which is our primary fuel, was $1.85, and our budget was $2.50. And so that's a nice thing to be below budget on our fuel. We have been looking at our fuel expenses, especially as we look towards the future in this year and towards 2020. And what we see from various government sources, such as the Energy Information Administration and private sector sources, we see a trend towards higher energy prices that are expected over the near term. I was reading a report just this week that unfortunately we might see gasoline prices edge up near $3 a gallon later this summer, which would
Brad, I think your mic is going out on you. You just grab one of the ones to the side. It was just blinking, and I assume maybe a low battery or something.
All right. And crude prices right now have been trending upwards. They've been pushing up to about $60 a barrel, where they've been down closer to $50 a barrel, which is a leading indicator that we're seeing increases in prices for fuel. So it will be interesting to see how the fuel prices impact us in the future. But for right now, it's helping us. Another interesting thing with regard to prices is sometimes what we see is our compressed natural gas vehicles use obviously natural gas, which doesn't move necessarily in the same way that diesel prices do. And so if diesel prices drop, sometimes CNG prices go up and vice versa, and it helps moderate the changes in our energy costs. With that being said, I wasn't going to go into the detail with regard to the financial statements at this time, but did you have any questions or comments or concerns that you might have?
Let me turn to my colleagues if there are any. Kent?
Yeah, I guess I have questions about why we don't know towards the end of March how much money we received for fares in February. I mean, are we on a cash basis? Are we on an accrual basis?
You know, I think a lot of it had to do with an overlap of several efforts. One, we are still involved in the close of the 2018 financial statements. So our controllership team has been doing double duty. They've been working with our auditors and
trying to figure out February, but also trying to close out and get ready for the audit for 2018.
Absolutely, and the team is working on smoothing out that issue so that we can get the proper accruals in place going forward.
Now, on our fare box revenue, is that strictly a cash basis, or do we have an accrual somehow?
We do have an accrual, and we amortize it over the time period of the contract.
For some of the large, like the University of Utah and BYU and UVU and some of those?
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we're good there.
Great.
Thank you for filling in.
I'll be back in a moment. So.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you.
I failed, and I probably should have done this. And Annette, do you want to introduce our newest member of our team?
Sorry, I'll do that real quick. Kara Berteau is joining us. She's about 20 minutes into her new job here at UTA and is going to be another executive assistant support to the board. And I can attest that they keep us running. So welcome, Kara.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
We're glad to have you here. Welcome. Our next item up is a modification to the authority's organizational structure. And I'll maybe turn to Steve here in a second, but just acknowledge that anytime we, especially when there's a time of attrition and there's a change in personnel, I think any organization would take a second and say, before we go forward, is it the right structure? Is there an opportunity here that doesn't affect somebody's job or that could improve a scenario, and it's not a reflection of past work or the past individuals. I think it's just always healthy to be constantly looking at that aspect. And we recognize that structure may change from time to time, probably not every couple months, but and saw an opportunity as Dave Garris chose to retire and looking at his area and how that might work in the organization structure and if there was an opportunity there. And so, Steve, do you want to talk about that proposal? And then we can certainly come to any comments or questions from the board.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to go to that next slide. So this is the organizational chart on the screen that we're proposing. So the changes that you see here, the creation of the Chief Service Development Officer, I think we've talked about some previously, that's going to combine capital development, planning, and the real estate TOD groups together. They constantly work together. None of our capital projects go forward probably without some discussion about, they certainly don't go forward without a significant planning effort ahead of those. And they oftentimes include some discussion of transit-oriented development. So it made sense to make that combination. I think I felt and heard interest from the board not to increase the number of officers in the company, and with Dave's retirement, that gave us the opportunity to do that. So what we're proposing then is some of direct reports to the executive director change a bit. You see the top one is compliance. What we're proposing there is Lisa Bowman, who is in our legal team, would become our compliance officer and oversee the civil rights group, and they'll be in that group. And she worked with us on policies, assist with the civil rights efforts going on. There's a lot of reporting coming out of that department, federal reporting and reporting to you as the board on a regular basis. And there's a lot of activity there that she can support and work with. Safety and security will report directly to the executive director. That's something that the Federal Transit Administration really encourages to make, keep safety and security a forefront within the organization. We've had that directly through Dave to the President and CEO in the past. This makes a more direct line with that group. Information technology and operational analytics and solutions were under Dave Garris as well, and bringing them on board, directly reporting to the executive director as well. So that adds to the scope of the executive director's work, but in balance, I think with what we have with a full-time board of trustees, it's a good balancing point. And so that's our recommendation to the board.
Probably, although I think it's certainly well known, but it's also fair to say that our legal services are transitioning in the next few weeks to the Attorney General's office as we
That's correct.
Follow through on the legislation direction from the legislature. So any questions from either board members about this structure or comments?
I just had a comment. I know we have had this discussion on several different levels, and I kind of think this will hopefully give us some of the nimbleness that we were looking for in terms of our structure moving forward, and also keeping, as you know, we're looking for an executive director. And so I think that this really can be a good move moving forward on that. So I wanted to thank you and the staff for working on this.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for approval of this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve R 2019-03-02, which modifies the authority's organizational structure as presented.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. We'll go to roll call.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, and thank you, Steve, for your efforts there. We'll next go to bring Brad Armstrong back and talk about leasing reimbursement.
Morning again. We want to go through this discussion. It's somewhat of a technical discussion about disbursement of leasing proceeds to purchase vehicles. In this first slide, we can see that in the 2019 budget, we have about $10 million budgeted for purchase of Salt Lake City buses, about 10 of those, about 30 paratransit vehicles, and 45 to 55 van pool vans. Totaling cost is just slightly over $10 million. As part of this process, we're going to be financing the purchase of these vehicles using lease proceeds. And let's see, can we go to the next slide? Maybe I can do it. Okay. And so part of the issue we have here is there's a timing issue of vehicle delivery versus the financing. Is we receive vehicles, as you can imagine, when you're receiving that many vehicles, you receive them over time at various times and places. It's sort of lumpy like we talked about before. But with regard to the financing, if we do the financing all at once, we get a better deal. And so what's happened is we've arranged lease financing, which is we'll receive proceeds later this year. But we started also to begin to receive vehicles right now. We've received a few, under 10, I believe, vehicles. And so the federal law says that we can only make the expenditure, only 60 days prior, unless you declare an intent to spend the funds. And that's what this resolution is about, is it's making an exception so that we say we intend on reimbursing the purchases that we're starting to make right now with those funds, which we're going to receive later. And so this allows us to do the financing at the best time possible for us at the lowest cost. And so that's what this resolution is about, is to authorize that.
So, Brad, does the financing take place at the end of the year, or did it take place back at the beginning of the year?
Well, the process, as I understand it, is that we started the process a while ago. We're going to actually receive the funding in April or May, I believe.
So it's fairly soon.
It's fairly soon.
Okay.
So, the timing is just slightly off, but it's not. We're not sitting on these funds for a long period of time, or we're not making purchases well ahead.
And I recognize that this is a fairly common way for a lot of public and private entities to get vehicles. And do you have a sense of the interest rate associated with the lease?
The interest rate was, let me ask my expert on this, Troy Bingham. It was about 3%. Okay. That's what I thought. I was involved in that procurement, but it slipped my mind. So.
All right. It's always good to have colleagues. Well, that's a very competitive rate for vehicles.
It is.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions of Beth? Looks like you do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Brad, I just wanted to understand. First off, I've not ever heard a financial term called lumpy, which is an excellent, good to know term, I believe. But on a more serious note, just curious how this is going to work. So it's 3% across the board. So it's a bus, it's a van pool. whatever that is, it's 3%. And when do you typically anticipate that this whole process will take place and we'll have all the vehicles?
It's going to happen during 2019, so it's going to be spread over the course of the year is when it's expected to happen. So it's just a function that there oft times are manufacturing delays and delivery snafus that happen, so that you get those deliveries when the vehicles have been manufactured. So it just takes time to receive them all.
So when we talk to the vendor for that, they're obviously aware of that. So they have a bus, for instance, and we had, I think 10 was on that list. Right. So their bus is completed and they just send it out and then continue developing the next ones and they come out as they're completed. Is that? But there is like a stop time, like so by the December 31st, everything we should have it. We should have everything.
That is the hope.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Have we ever had a situation where we did not complete the leasing and delivery by the end of the year?
I'm not aware of any, but Steve I'm not aware of that.
I'm not either. But what happens is, we'll go out for a procurement and do that bid. There are obviously other transit agencies that are purchasing vehicles, doing the same thing. So you get queued up and you get a space in their production schedule to get that going. And, we've let them know. They knew there was a procurement coming from us. So they, as whoever wins that procurement will then formally slot those buses in there, knowing what our time frame is on our procurement request, trying to meet that. As Brad mentioned, there can be delays in that caused by circumstances beyond our control, but I'm not aware of specifically with buses that we have in a lease program that we've had delays. But
so we take the money down by April, and we take delivery on a bus in December. So we've paid 3% interest on the money, but we haven't been able to use the bus.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, and we would invest those funds. So Bob takes that cash and puts it in the, in those fund areas where we can.
Are we able to earn the 3%?
I don't think we're quite up to that. I think what we saw before was around 2.6 or so.
Well, this is around 2.5.
Yeah.
So we do have a bit of a carrying cost.
So I think that they've done the analysis, Trustee, where they've looked at that versus going out for an incremental lease at the time that bus arrives, and you're
then you're paying 3.5% or 4%.
Yeah, and then you've got other costs associated with loan origination and things like that.
Right.
So I think what Bob's done is looked at this over the life of that, understanding what those delivery times are, and said this is the best value to the agency.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
And I had one more question. What type of buses did we order? Are they diesel or CNG or combination, or how do we determine that?
I believe we are clean diesel buses right now. We're pretty much at our max for what we can accommodate with CNG being at the central bus garage and having to bring them over to the fueling station. It has some inherent inefficiencies in doing that over that distance. So we've been continuing to get diesels until we get this facility constructed.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion on this particular resolution for the leasing reimbursement.
Mr. Chair, I propose that we approve the R 2019-03-03 leasing reimbursement as proposed.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll go to a roll call.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Brad. Our next step is contracts, disbursements, change orders, and pre-procurement. And We have one with Siemens, and this says Brad. Are you coming back to this one? Or is it Troy? I wasn't sure. You really should let Bob go on vacation. Or go away for whatever purpose, or be sick.
I should never relax, that's for sure. In this particular case, what we have is we have a situation where in our supply chain management process, we have our supply chain team automatically set up automatic purchases of supplies and parts for our light rail system as needed. And over the course of November to January of this year, we had an even number of 20 different purchase orders, which went from, less than $20 to over $50,000 in total. And it so happens that those 20 different orders went over the $200,000 limit. And so that's what this request is for, is the total approval of the total disbursement of the $209,000.
Any questions in that regard?
Actually, Mr. Chair, thanks. I'm sorry. I had one quick question. So just for light rail, so are these all types of invoices? How many, is it on just a continual repair replace, or is there something specific that this is focused on?
Actually, this is various items that are purchased as part of the ordinary course of maintaining vehicles. It wasn't for a specific project or something of that sort. The ordinary course of business when we were repairing things, I was looking at it as like they had like $50 worth of washers that they were buying, or they were buying, they had wash bottles that were used for cleaning the windows when you're driving them, as I understand, that sort of thing. Just miscellaneous parts that needed to be purchased, which when you're purchasing them for light rail vehicles can be quite expensive, as you can imagine.
This wasn't for the repair of the car that was damaged and sent to Sacramento and brought back? That wasn't included in this?
I do not believe so, because that was more of a capital expenditure in terms of a major repair, and this was part of the miscellaneous repair activity.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we grant approval for the contracts, disbursements, change orders, and pre-procurement disbursements to Siemens.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. We'll go to roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Brad. I think you're off the hook for a little bit, if not for the rest of the meeting.
Sit down now.
We'll go next to our pre-procurement in regards to bridge inspections, and Steve.
Thank you, Chair. One item today in the pre-procurement is a procurement for bridge inspection services. We have a number of bridges and culverts that do need to be inspected on an annual basis, located along our rail corridors, both commuter rail and light rail. And the intent is for a 3-year procurement for that, to get a firm in, get them with their staff to understand, and get familiar with our facilities. So every bridge or culvert longer than 10 feet or 10 feet in diameter needs to be inspected every year. These, as you can imagine, as the system ages, the inspections need to be more complex and more thorough. They're looking at all the major components, structure and substructure elements of those structures. And we had been doing this in-house in the past, and some of our staff, primarily in the asset management group, had been trained to do that. But it's just too much for their workload right now. They really need to spend their time in that asset management type work. And then we need, as these vehicles these structures get older, they need more thorough investigation with more skills. So that's the intent of this procurement.
Steve, one of the questions that I'm supportive of obviously of the bridge inspections. One of the questions we I had is UDOT does this. I mean, they have to do it for their own bridges, and I would imagine a lot of these are near their bridges. Is there a possibility, and really, is there any savings in somehow doing an interlocal with them and having them inspect them? Or is it a sophistication that exceeds their standards, or they're just not interested? I just didn't know if anybody had ever approached them, and because I know they have sort of a section, not sort of, they do have a section that inspects bridges.
Yeah, we could look into that, report back on that.
I think if you could just explore it, and if they may not be interested at all, or it may not be any less expensive, and but I just was thinking if there's an opportunity to take advantage of their inspectors who might is anyway.
Yeah. Some good points. We'll look at their workload and things like that. You know, you're hitting a lot of the culverts and things like that during low flow periods, so you've got to
do them when they're
you got to do them at the right time
now.
so you don't get into Lamont's thing of getting swept away with more than 6 inches of water.
Well, UDOT has 2,500 that they do statewide. UDOT actually is responsible for the bridges and culverts and all of that for the local areas as well.
Wow.
And so it's not just on the state roads, but any road they have that responsibility. So they're pretty equipped. Do you know how many bridges and culverts we have to inspect? You know a number?
I don't. And I don't see anybody here with the number in their back pocket. No. I'll come back when I report on this UDOT work, and I'll give you an inventory.
Yeah,
as well.
It'd be interesting to see, because, I mean, if we've got 1,000, then they may not be able to do it. But if we've got 50, they probably could squeeze that in. But it'd be interesting to check with them.
Yeah, and we have to manage, you know, our access is off a rail.
Sure.
So you've got a vehicle that rides the rail typically that has a boom on it that gets over and inspects, and then they get their hip waders and things like that to use as well.
I get to go out on some of those inspections.
Okay.
I'd love to go out there. I've done that with UDOT over the years.
All right.
And I'm willing to let Kent report on that.
I've done that before at UDOT, so I would be very interested in doing that.
We'll sign you up. Thank you.
No, thanks, Steve, and certainly we're supportive either way. So, next is our government relations update with Matt Sybil. And Matt, you're welcome to either do it over there or here. They might see your face better from the other side, but.
Here.
It's good clarification.
It sounded a little ominous there.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Board. I'll be brief here. So the session ended last Thursday a little bit early at 11 o'clock. Haven't seen that for a long time. I actually wanted to, you should give yourselves a pat on the back, because the session ends at 11 o'clock Thursday night. 36 hours later, you're on a plane to Washington, D.C., and as you alluded to earlier, we had really successful meetings with the leadership of APTA, the acting administrator of the Federal Transit Administration, who we're the recipient of hundreds of millions of dollars from, and then also each of the offices of our Congressional House members. So it was a busy 4 days. So no rest for the wicked. There were a record number of bills this year, 574 to be exact. That beat last year's record of 536. So there seems to be a trend with less government, more bills. I don't quite understand. So we track all of these as the governor signs them. I don't anticipate any vetoed bills. The last day that he can do that is on April 3rd. And so we're also going to provide you, Michelle Larson in our office does a great job. She'll assemble a very detailed report with more information on each of these bills for you. We'll have that to you within a week. So thanks to Michelle for doing that. Interim meetings are going to begin in May. And of course, tax reform is going to be top of the list for those interim meetings. And I'll talk more about that later, but we're going to continue to participate in those meetings. And I don't know if Blake Wade is still here. he left, but bond counsel will be at our side to make sure we protect our bondholders' interests. And then, of course, there's just, we want to make sure that we continue our long-term sustainable local option sales tax funding without any interruptions. Let me talk about some specific bills briefly. So the SB 72, there ended up being 3 substitutes with that bill. That's the cleanup bill from the Transportation Tax Review Task Force. And pertaining to us here at the agency, it clarifies the nomination process for you going forward. Changes the advisory board to the advisory council. So that has a new name. Not to mention the name of UTA itself stays UTA. And then there's also
now, what's the effective date? Meaning, obviously it's subject to the governor's signature, but we just sort of had this question because the advisory board's meeting later today. I assume it's still the advisory board until the governor signs it, right?
Yeah, and actually, that's a good question. I tried to look this up when I was sitting there because I knew one of you was going to ask this question. I think it's July 1st, but I don't know actually the effective date of the bill.
Okay, I just didn't know if it had like a May 8th or...
Yeah, sometimes they are earlier, to your point.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
But I think that today they're still the advisory board, so because he hasn't signed the bill yet. So, and then there was a provision added about some oversight from the state when 2 transit districts or transit providers overlap to make sure things are coordinated. And we got some clarification in our situation with Park City, who we serve, that market. They don't charge a fare, so there were some revenue sharing provisions that we exempted that situation from. So that ended up in a good place. I mentioned this earlier, HB 441, that's the tax reform and equalization bill. It didn't pass, but we anticipate that there's going to be a special session in August or September whereby the bill actually takes effect, some version of the bill. And we worked very closely. Trustee Holbrook was involved with this, but we met with Representative Quinn, and he was very responsive to our concerns and our recommendations from the UTA perspective. So we'll continue that dialogue. The Affordable Housing Bill, SB 34, had a bunch of ups and downs during the session. There were some tweets over the last couple of days that were interesting that I won't comment on. You can look those up on your own from the Senate side. The funding was stripped out, hence the dialogue online, but we still think it's a very good bill because, again, it establishes these major transit investment corridors, and that's a really powerful way for us to work with our local communities, our development communities, and our partners. And then it's also, this relates to the service choices process that we're getting into with Laura Hansen's group of looking at some corridors where we would provide a sort of a core bus route service that almost acts like a rail line. And cities can count on those types of services. They start early in the day, go long into the night, very frequent service. So we're in that bill. That piece stayed, so we're excited about that. And I would anticipate some of the funding for that coming back once tax reform is worked out at the state level. So I'm optimistic about that. And again, we work closely with both Representative Quinn and that wasn't Representative Quinn on 34.
Potter.
And then
that was Representative
Senator
Potter.
Andrew.
Thank you. And Senator Anderegg. And we'll continue on with that dialogue effectively. Maybe onto some bills that got appropriations. So the one that got the most attention, I guess, was HB 353. That's Representative Briscoe's bill, who had Senator Bramble sponsor it in the Senate. And that was trimmed a little bit, but that provides $500,000 to us as an agency to fund up to 7 free fare days as a pilot sometime in the next 3 years. And so we'll work with staff, and DAQ is excited about it because we'll develop some mechanisms that allow us to allow DAQ to do some forecasting and tie it into when we could actually implement the free fare days of service. And so we learned a lot as we do in these types of things with the 2 free fare days we had just a couple of weeks ago. So we're excited about that. The Coordinated Mobility Office, that's in Cheryl Beveridge's wheelhouse, and so Ryan Taylor and Christy Allen run that program. Quick background, they, back in 2017, they received, I would call a noble yet unfunded mandate to effectively coordinate transportation for seniors and those with disabilities across the entire region. And this year we got a shot in the arm for some funding for that. We got a one-time study to $250,000. Senator Harper shepherded this through. It was a really positive thing, which will get all the parties at the same table, use a third-party consultant to really frame up how that could work across the region. And so we're excited about that. And then there was also an ongoing $70,000 piece for some specific web-based technology parts of our platform that we're excited about. We missed out on some appropriations, some other ones, the Vineyard Frontrunner Double Track. We'll have to take another look at that and come up with an alternative plan. And I know Trustee Holbrook's been involved with this discussion, and I think we're optimistic that we can work with some of our other partners to find monies for that double track. The Point of the Mountain did not receive any appropriations. I've talked to Mary DiLoretto and her team, and there was enough money that was received from some of our other partners, Salt Lake County, and then some private contributions by the Silicon Slopes people. We can actually go forward with the alternatives analysis piece of that. And so we're going to get that underway, and then if the legislature is interested in funding the environmental piece of that, they can come back to that next year. There were many other bills that passed, including a railroad utility bill that I wanted to thank Lisa Bowman on. There's a lot of back and forth the last day of the session. We're gonna have to do some updates on probably some of our SOPs and how we handle some of our utility work online with permit applications. But we'll get that done. So we'll work with staff and summarize this with staff and go from there. Steve already talked about the big reveal with the FDA 2020 CIG report. So why don't I end there and just take any other questions or thoughts you might have, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Kent, you want to, looks like you had a question first.
Yeah, this coordinated mobility effort where we've been funded $250,000 to create that coordinated mobility. A while back, while we were at the APTA conference, I had a chance to visit with Brad Miller from Florida. He's in the St. Pete area. They have been working on a coordinated mobility exactly like that, and they reported that out in one of the sessions that I attended. And so I had a chance to visit with him yesterday morning, and he is willing to have some discussions to share ideas on what they have done, because they reported that they had actually created or were in the process of creating this coordinated mobility software, similar to what we're looking to do. And so I asked him if he would be willing to share. He said, I'll share whatever we've got, whatever we're doing. But he did say that the most effective one and the one that they're actually working with is Dallas.
Interesting. Okay.
He didn't have a name, but I do have Brad's card, and we can contact him, and he's been in touch with the people at Dallas that have done some of the same things. So rather than reinvent the wheel, we may be able to at least get a rim
That's good.
from some, either Brad or somebody in Dallas to help us, because they were talking about doing some of the same things that we're talking about in our coordinated mobility.
Sure. Two thoughts. A, I'll connect our folks with the Dallas and the Florida.
Yeah, I've got Brad's card,
Thank you for doing that.
So we can get some information. Plus, I kept the brochure that they actually passed out in the session that has a number of references and ideas to their website that we could maybe even go take a look at, and I'll share that with you.
My other thought was that, so we'll do that for sure. My other thought was that you were, not that I expected anything differently, but you were really paying attention at the APTA legislative conference.
Crazy, isn't it? The 1 hour that I paid attention actually paid off, maybe.
Beth, did you have any questions?
Just a comment. I just want to say, we really appreciate all of your help and guidance through this, Matt. This has been, it has been a lot of information, but I think that, we've managed to coordinate it all and kind of get a grasp on it. And this has, all of this, the legislation that we're talking about locally now more, not the federal so much, but, or the other discussion, I think the local stuff, especially like Senate Bill 34, I feel like that is, as I understand it from Senator Andrigh, that's an ongoing scenario. So that's going to continue to become something that we're going to focus on long and short term. And I know that impact is going to be within our community. So I feel like this is a really positive opportunity for us. So wanted to just thank you on that again.
Thanks. Can I just make a quick comment relating to SB 34? You reminded me. So it's an ongoing effort. The state established this commission on housing affordability, and UTA was named as we're at the table. This was actually in the 2018 session. So I've talked with Chair Christensen about that, and so the board will have a presence on that commission going forward, and that's likely to last for 2 to 3 years, or at least until there's a continuous amount of funding for that effort, I would anticipate. So, thank you.
Matt, I would just echo our thanks to both you and Michelle, and I know at times Melanie, and certainly to Bob, who seemed like every 10 minutes had some fiscal note to respond to. And I'm sure there's numerous others.
It was, can I say, there was a team effort. So our intern Sam Hall was continually running documents and people up to the legislature. Laura Hanson got in on it. She helped me with some things, some materials. There's a ton of input that went into the session. It just the organization really steps up during those 45 days, and so it's fantastic to see that responsiveness and teamwork.
Well, and I sense, and I've made this comment to a couple folks, sometimes you just, while we didn't get every win we wanted, sometimes you just take a little bit of abuse in the sense that I felt like we did make some overall progress in the thing, and it looks like my certificate's the only thing that will say Transit District of Utah on it. So, did you get one too? Okay. And you still probably haven't gotten yours.
I still don't have it.
Okay.
Darn it. It could be a collector's item and I don't have it. I'm going to work on that.
So, but anyway, we really do appreciate the work you've done. So, thanks. Just maybe more for point of order. We're going to go look at a closed session, and then when we recess, we're actually going to recess until 3 o'clock this afternoon. There are some items that we potentially may take action on, but those are items that will be reviewed in the advisory board's meeting this afternoon, and it would be, well, first of all, some of them we couldn't take action on regardless, but it also would be premature to take any kind of action until they have a chance to give feedback and recommendations and so we'll be back at 3 o'clock if there are any here for that item. Seeing no other items, we'll next go to entertain a motion for a closed session to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we go and adjourn to a closed session to discuss reasonably imminent litigation as outlined.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor to go into closed session, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes, and then at the conclusion of that closed session, we'll recess until 3 o'clock this afternoon.